To kick off your comments. And one thing I want to mention about this microphone is it makes a lot of noise when you're moving it up and down, so I'll turn it off between speakers, and so you just need to turn it back on. Thank you.
Sure. Give an overview of the continuum since the picture is up there. This is what we in the city of Bend call our housing continuum. All right. This is what we in the city of Bend call our housing continuum. And when I started at the city of Bend 5 years ago, we were just two of us, the affordable housing department, and all that we worked on was affordable housing. And it became clear that affordable housing wasn't in a group on its own, that every part of this continuum impacted affordable housing. So we have transitioned to the housing department and no longer are just a staff of two. Now we are a staff of a few more than that, so I have to like count in my head. I think there's 6 of us now. We haven't hired that 7th person yet. And pardon me and give me a little grace. I had COVID last week, so I do have a little brain fog. So typically I present pretty sharply, but today I might be like, where is that in my brain? So as far as the housing continuum is concerned, OHCS, that's the Oregon Housing and Community Services, released a regional housing needs assessment in 2019. And that assessment told Bend where they needed housing at every aspect of the continuum. And from those numbers and where we have tried to make a difference today, we were short home ownership on the continuum of 747 units. We were short market rental housing, 498 units. We were short affordable home ownership, 953 units. And we were short affordable rental housing, 636 units. And we were short supportive housing, 449 units. We were short transitional housing, 408 units. And we were short emergency shelter beds, 879 beds. Wow. So in 2019, 2020, we were short a significant amount of beds and units at every level of the continuum. And when you're short units at every level of the continuum, there's not a whole lot of mobility. Those in affordable housing can't move into market rate housing. Those in shelters can't move into affordable housing. And those who are homeless have little or no access to anything. And so we were really stuck. And so we've been doing a lot since 2020 with regards to building and incentivizing building and creating home ownership opportunities and rental opportunities at every level of the continuum. That doesn't just involve funding, which is typically what the city provided in the past to incentivize, but lots of policy changes. In 2020, we adopted policies supporting housing, including ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes in single-family residential zones. And state legislation opportunities expanded our urban growth boundaries for additional housing, both affordable and market rate. In addition, we adopted greater property tax exemptions for mixed-use developments that provide both affordable and other public benefits, such as net zero housing. You might hear in the next month or so about a program called MUPD, that's mixed-use tax exemptions. And so the city is trying to incentivize more mixed-use developments that also provide a public benefit, whether that be affordable housing in the development or net zero in the development or childcare in the development. So, but that would require the school district, the county, and Parks and Recreation District and the libraries to also agree to exempt their property taxes for those types of developments. So the city's trying to lead that, but we'll see if those other special districts are willing to incentivize that as well. Some other policy for additional market rental housing include those property tax exemptions and micro units and single room occupancy units that we have created codes for greater development, and a density bonus. If a multi-family unit is building affordable housing, like a floor of affordable housing, then we'll give them additional density opportunities to create more market rate units in addition to those affordable units. And then we've also incorporated in the core area of Bend a tax increment financing or urban renewal area, so that those property taxes will be kind of frozen essentially, so that more development can happen in the central part of Bend. For affordable home ownership or affordable rental housing, we have SDC exemptions, expedited review. So if you're building or affordable home ownership or affordable rental housing, your permits and applications for development get processed faster, get prioritized. And then we also have those property tax exemptions for nonprofit organizations that are developing affordable housing. And finally, with regards to a lot of the supportive housing or transitional housing, those are kind of the units that help people move out of homelessness. We are short our service providers. We don't have people to operate those things. We have reached capacity in our community of organizations to do that work, and so we can't add more. Housing Works is building a permanent supportive housing unit. It'll have 33 units. It'll be completed in 2024. They're doing it in partnership with Neighbor Impact, and Shepherd's House is taking on operating that. But Shepherd's House is also operating our navigation center and their own services, and so they're at capacity and can't do anymore. Neighbor Impact is also at capacity operating the Stepping Stone shelter, which we have on Division. So we've opened quite a few of those transitional housing examples, including Veterans Village, St. Vincent Place, and Central Oregon Villages. Those are all kind of sheds, essentially, or spaces with a bed and maybe a small bathroom unit. And then they have community space with a kitchen and other elements to that. So, sorry. Oh, no, it's fine. And then with regards to emergency shelters, we have the Navigation Center, which is our only low barrier, and that's right by Weimar, the Lighthouse Navigation Center. And then Stepping Stone, which is off Division Street, and the Old Rainbow Motel, which is off Franklin. Those are the 3 shelters that we have provided or funded. I should say not really provided, it's the organizations that are providing the operations of that. We just funded purchasing the old hotels and funded purchasing the building. And then we also help obtain funds for the operations of those 3 developments, which have all been since 2020.
Wow.
So at the time in 2020, we needed 879 shelter beds, and currently we are short 500 beds. So we have created 505 beds in 3 years. Our most recent point in time count found that there were 1,012 houseless in Bend, and 73% of those were unsheltered. Probably the biggest statistic that city staff became aware of is that according to HUD, between 2011 and 2017, and HUD is the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department for the federal government, between 2011 and 2017, the city of Bend lost, and I say lost meaning these which were once affordable became no longer affordable. 2,638 units to our community members at or below 80% area median income. So we are still just trying to recover that affordable housing that we once had. And then, I don't know if it's possible to go to the other slide, yeah. So this just gives you an example of what you can afford in Bend. And you can see at the very top what the area median home price is, which is not affordable to anyone that works in Bend. So you can see who our market is. It's not our community members. It's outside of the city of Bend. And if we don't intentionally build and develop for our community members, then we will continue to just build for those outside of Bend. I think that's all I have to say. And I don't know if we want to hear from Redmond next or Sisters.
Take a vote. Who wants to hear from Redmond? Go from biggest to small.
I don't know what the hand is raising.
Let the ladies speak first.
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm Linda Cline. I'm the
Hold it.
housing program analyst for Redmond. I've been in this position about 1.5 years. We are a department of one. We're about 1/3 the size of Bend Redmond is, and therefore I think, if we're going proportional, we should have 2, and we hope to in January have 2. So we're working on that. Along with housing, I also do homelessness related stuff. I'm a little split, and so I'm just not quite at this level that Racheal is with information. But I will tell you, for starters, when we look at this graph, basically incomes are about the same throughout the region, right? People travel to different cities to get the better income, whatever. So it averages out. But the house price in Redmond is about $500,000. So we're just under that green level. So maybe that marketing manager could afford a house in Redmond. Otherwise, you're gonna have to have at least 2 very good incomes going to afford a house in Redmond. I looked at the statistics about how we're doing in keeping up in the last 4 years, so 2020 till now in our housing starts. And we're actually keeping up. If we project out to the end of this year, we will actually be meeting the demand of our population growth. We need approximately 546 new units a year, and if we average out the last 4 years, 2020 through now, we are just meeting that. We're going to exceed it just a little bit by the end of the year, I think. Projecting on that, but that doesn't really answer the question about affordability, right? So we know in 2019, from the housing study, I believe the one that you guys were part of having done, 42% of Redmond households were cost burdened, which meant they were spending more than 30% of their income on housing. We've made some gains. Housing Works has done a great job with some projects. Habitat's been really doing some great work in our community. So we're starting to make gains, but we really need to continue to work on that. So some areas where we're doing it, the city has been land banking some property. We're starting to make that available for housing projects. We have 7 city-owned sites that will be coming out as housing projects in the next few years. One of those it was formerly known as Skyline Village. It's known as North Point now. That's going to be approximately 450 units. At least half of those will be affordable. Another quarter at least will be that workforce zone of housing. So 100, between 80% AMI, which is area median income, and 120 of the area median income. And then the remainder will be market rate. We also have the nonprofits right now in our community, so Housing Works, Habitat, Rooted, have all proposed or have in the works at least 7 projects. And so that'll be another 181 units of affordable housing coming online in Redmond in the next, probably that's about a 2-year period that those will be online. So we're making some gains. not quite fast enough. It's not quite keeping up with the affordability issue clearly, but we are making some gains. As far as sheltering, really Redmond has been a little behind in sheltering. Not surprising, as is I think every city across the country. In 2022, Bethlehem Inn opened a shelter, but it's not a low barrier shelter. It's a hotel conversion as well. I believe it has 88 beds that they've been working on filling up. But that one does have requirements of sobriety, things like that. So it's not a shelter for everybody. Shepherd's House is planning to open by November 1st. That'll be another, I believe, approximately 45 beds. Chris, I don't know if you know that number, but anyway, and so those are going to be low barrier, so anybody's welcome with those beds. And then we have Oasis Village because of the governor's executive order money that's coming down. Oasis Village is a pallet house thing, kind of like what Racheal spoke to. It's going to start with 15 units that need to be operational because of the funding source. They need to be operational by January 10th. So we're working on sheltering. They're coming on along fast considering we didn't have any really before. And we'll just continue, and we're looking at also an affordable RV park model as well, because we know a lot of our homeless are actually working in our community. They just can't afford to live in our communities. They maybe have an older RV that can't be in an RV park, so we're trying to kind of fill that gap as well. That hopefully will release some pressure on our houselessness situation in the area.
Thank you, everyone, for having me today. So Linda's complained about not having enough staff for her population for housing. We're really hurting for specialists. We don't have a housing specialist with the City of Sisters because I think we have like 16 total employees with the City of Sisters. That includes all of our snowplow drivers and all the people taking care of all the beautiful planters outside that you see along the street. So it kind of falls onto, it's kind of a group effort, but it largely falls kind of onto my department. And I'm not a housing specialist. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of person. But we're certainly not immune in Sisters to the same issues that Racheal and Linda have mentioned. I don't know exactly what the median house price in Sisters is. I mean, after you get past a certain point, does it really matter if it's not affordable to our local residents? And the rents are not affordable either. We suffer from a lack of multifamily units in the community. There's been a mostly single family built in Sisters for a long time, and we're trying to encourage or try to facilitate efforts to get more multifamily built there. But it's not an easy thing to do. Sometimes those projects are not always welcome next to single-family zone properties. But I think one major issue that we're dealing with is that we just don't have a lot of land supply. If you look at the City of Sisters zoning map, the municipal boundary is the urban growth boundary. So there hasn't been a whole lot of planning going on for the future there. I've only been there 3 years, so it wasn't my fault. So we've been in the process. We've been looking at it more from our housing needs from the land use side of things. We just recently updated our comprehensive plan, and when you do your update to your comprehensive plan, you're required to do technical studies, and including a housing needs analysis that looks at what your population projections are. They look out 20 years to examine what your population projections are. And it takes a look at past takes a look at your demographics, it takes a look at past trends. And we thought we had a pretty good handle on what our projections were back in 2021. And then the state of Oregon, actually it's Portland State University, which controls the population projections, came back and said, the population projections we gave you back in 2021, they were too low. So we've had to revise all of our numbers up, and it appears that City of Sisters population will be doubling in 20 years, which is a staggering kind of statistic to kind of figure, to kind of contemplate. So that helps us. At least we know what to plan for when you know what your population is going to be, and that translates into the number of housing units that you're going to need. The average household size in Sisters is about 2.8 people, I believe. So that what we're looking at is we're going to need about 2,081 housing units and 1,624 households. So you have to assume that when you're trying to meet your need, you have to assume a vacancy factor. Right now, about 20% of the units in Sisters are vacant, so certainly not helping out our housing problem when many of those housing units are just sitting there unoccupied. But kind of some of the nature of our community, second homes, Airbnbs, those kinds of things. So we have to, we're going to have to do, where do we put those units? I think is the kind of the question that we're grappling with right now in the community. I said we don't have a whole lot of vacant land. The city doesn't have any surplus land like Redmond does, and maybe Bend to contribute. So the question in our community where are we going to put them? Do we build up? Do we through infill and increased building heights and densities, or do we increase outwards, expanding our urban growth boundary? And there's a lot of folks that don't want either of those solutions, but the state of Oregon basically mandates when you have an identified housing need that you have to have a solution for how you're going to accommodate that. So while there's a lot of folks in our community that would just probably love to keep it the way it is, that's not an option. So what we're trying to do is really meet those housing needs, and also try to preserve what everybody loves about Sisters is the community character there. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing. So we're trying to find that happy medium where we grow up a little bit and we infill a little bit more, and we potentially expand a little bit to accommodate those needs. So if we go along the lines of what our demand is, we'll need about 98 units per year for the next 20 years. And I just looked back in 2022, which was a pretty robust year. I think we had 67 permits, single-family permits. So you can see that we'd have to step up our game a little bit to meet that demand. So things that we're doing to try to address the housing crunch. I mentioned the urban growth boundary. That's something that we're going to be contemplating as a community here in the future to see if City Council wants to go forward with that. But even when you say you want to go forward with your urban growth boundary, it doesn't mean it's going to happen like that. It could be. I've heard it's an 18 to 24 month process to get your urban growth boundary expanded, and then you have to get property owners willing to sell to developers, and then you have to go through the annexation process. Then you have to go through the subdivision and master plan process. Then they have to develop. So I mean, under best case scenarios, it could be 5 to 7 years before before we have units available to help meet the demand, unless we can, get them to expedite that. But I'm not sure if that exists yet. So we also adopted a housing plan because we kind of felt that we didn't really have a plan to guide kind of the steps that are needed to get more housing supply out in the community, both to meet our free market housing needs and to meet our affordable needs. So that plan was put together, and it had a variety of recommendations to help out with that. Similar to how Racheal, I think you were talking about how the city has made amendments to their zoning code. There are lots of barriers in our zoning codes to building housing, and so we've made a lot of changes already in terms of increasing the allowed density in our multifamily district to make projects more feasible and make it more attractive to development. We weren't able to get the building heights increased, nor the parking requirements reduced yet, which are two major elements in trying to get more density on a site. So even though we increase the allowed density, those other factors could contract that or make that not completely achievable. Talking about rezoning some lands to multifamily. We don't have any surplus city lands that we could take advantage of that we could offer to an affordable housing developer, but we do have a very large, one of the last remaining vacant parcels in Sisters is just north of City Hall, kind of on the way up to the post office. I think it's about 9 acres, and it's owned by an affordable housing developer. So we're trying to get them to look at that site, and we need affordable housing, they do affordable housing, why can't we get them together? So we're working to try to encourage them to kind of come to the table and see what can be possible there. It'll be perfect site. It's very close to downtown and lots of services, so hopefully that'll happen in the near future. If we do get our urban growth boundary expanded, we can use annexation agreements to require more affordable housing from development that comes into the community. That's a great tool that we could use. I'm gonna have to talk to Racheal about some of the things that they've been doing with the city of Bend that are successful. Some things that are on our housing plan that you mentioned that you guys have already done. So I found that there's no reason to recreate the wheel here. It's to the best thing is to talk to those communities that have already gone through some of these things. So we'll be in touch with you, I think. So that's a handy tool, is the housing plan that we have in place to spur more housing. And then one thing we do have in place that's been helpful is our Affordable Housing Grant Fund, which is a portion of our transient room tax that we charge for all hotels and Airbnbs. That goes into a fund that we can use to help pay for like buy downs of system development charges for Habitat for Humanity, or other groups which operate in the community. And then we were lucky enough to be able to take advantage of some ARPA funds that the county, that Deschutes County had, that passed through to us in the form of about $500,000, which in and of itself is not enough to build much affordable housing, but it was enough to help us attract an affordable housing developer to the community and use it as some leverage to get them into the community. And there's a group called Northwest Housing Alternatives, which is, I think, the biggest affordable housing provider developer in the state of Oregon, interested in doing a project in our community. And we've been able to tie them with a landowner who was looking at a church property, actually, that was looking at doing some affordable housing on their own, when we just happened to call them and say, hey, we got a developer that's interested and with some money. It's still contingent upon them getting their funding from the state, but it's promising and would result in a 40-unit multifamily apartment building that would be limited to folks making 60% of the area median income or less. In terms of addressing homelessness, our role, I guess, as we see it, is trying to assist where we can. It's not one of our core services, but it's trying to prevent future homelessness by increasing the amount of affordable housing to try to provide more opportunities to get people out of the forest. I think similar to many other areas, a lot of our homeless population are commuting to jobs, but they just can't afford to live in the area. We did have a proposal for an emergency shelter. Well, before I get to that, in the past 4 years, the city has supported the Sisters Cold Weather Shelter in terms of getting a emergency approval to operate in local churches. But the churches kind of reached, it was kind of beyond their capacity to continue to accommodate that. And the local group was able to get a grant fund to help purchase a property in Sisters in an industrial park, which we thought was kind of a perfect site for this. And the state has House Bill 2006, which was designed to make it easier to site homeless shelters in your community by streamlining things, but it didn't quite work that way in Sisters, and there was a torrent of opposition, and it looks as though that might not get supported in the community. It doesn't mean that it might not still happen, but the applicant would have to appeal that to district court, and I'm not sure if they still planning to do that, but it still may happen, and hopefully it does. But that's been a source of controversy in our town. We've got, it wasn't supposed to, I think the designers of the House Bill designed it so that it wouldn't get to this point, but it ended up at a council hearing with hundreds of people showing up either via Zoom or in person. So that's a continuing challenge in our community. So that's just kind of an overview of what's going on in Sisters. So I will leave it at that, and hopefully we'll answer any questions you guys might have.
Going to define net zero housing.
Net zero housing is essentially your utility costs are something that you like, it essentially is like net zero. Whatever you get for what you consume, is coming to you versus solar or some other, water kind of way that, helps you prevent zero-like emissions from your housing. And also, reduces your utility costs significantly.
This is a question for the group. Have your cities updated building codes for apartments, in parentheses, multifamily, to require noise abatement between apartments and other codes that would make apartments more desirable?
So I'm not sure, like, I think we just follow state building code requirements and that's it.
City Sister says not, but one thing that we did do recently to make multifamily more attractive, I guess, or more livable, is to require minimum storage requirements for each unit, so that you can store a bicycle and you don't have to store all your gear on your porch if you're lucky to have one. Stole that from Redmond.
We did it. Yeah, same answer. We have reduced some parking, especially on affordable units and workforce. But otherwise, as far as the abatement of noise and such, not at this point.
Thank you, Linda. This is a question for Redmond. It says, as we look at the housing continuum in Redmond, from shelter all the way to market rate housing, where do you think the biggest gap exists, and what challenges does Redmond face in filling the gap?
The common thought around at least community development department is that supportive housing, basically Redmond has pretty much none. And so that's housing for folks that are coming out of transitional housing. Some folks will always need some assistance. Some folks will always need some assistance to stay in their home. And we don't really have that. One, I hope, exciting development is as we're developing this North Point development that we're working on, the city's working on, is it's a lot easier to put supportive housing into a new neighborhood than it is to put it into an existing neighborhood. So it is our hope that we'll get some supportive housing put into that. We also have the same capacity problem that that Racheal mentioned, which is service providers actually provide that support. There's money from the state to build supportive housing, not necessarily great gobs of money for supporting it, for paying for it. We're hoping there's some tools, not quite ready to make public, that we're looking at, some funding tools that'll probably come before our council in the next several months to help maybe pay for some of those services.
Thank you. Okay, this next one is for the group. Can cities require that a percentage of multifamily homes be affordable in the community?
It's commonly known as inclusionary zoning. I know it was affordable, or it was legal in other states that I've worked in. I'm not sure the latest. I thought I heard at one time that inclusionary zoning was not legal in Oregon.
They reversed that.
Did they reverse that? Okay, so there you go. It is feasible, legally feasible, but sometimes it's a political issue to try to get that approved in the community, because what the response will be back from the development community is you're making it more expensive to develop housing, and we thought you were trying to make it more affordable. But, so I've seen it worked in other communities pretty well in Colorado.
So the city of Bend thus far has not incorporated inclusionary zoning, but instead used more incentives to just try and encourage through either expedited review or SDC exemptions or property tax exemptions, try and entice those developers to create affordable housing units within their multi-unit developments. And the reason is because Portland has such requirements in some of their inclusionary zoning, and it's kind of backfired in a sense of there's such resistance to it that it decreased affordable housing development. And so we just have some hesitation in embracing such policies to that effect. That hasn't happened in every community. It's been successful elsewhere. We're just cautious about how inclusionary zoning has been set up in the state because it hasn't worked in the communities that have embraced it.
We've toyed with it slightly with the idea of instituting, mostly in the case of, with annexations, because we do have, urban growth boundary land outside of our city limits. So we've toyed with that idea. We have not actually put it on the books yet, though.
Thank you.
And the state incentives for like little tweaks to urban growth boundaries that both Redmond and Bend received required affordable housing be a part of that urban growth extension. And so that's one thing that the state has kind of allowed us to do as far as inclusionary zoning, when we are expanding our urban growth boundary outside of the urban growth boundary process.
Is there a percentage attached to that?
Yep.
What's the percentage?
It's 30% for Parkside Place. That's the first urban growth extension that Bend is doing. I think we're about to annex that in the very near future. The next piece is Stevens Road. And I'm not sure about that percentage, but the housing department was very happy with what the state required, so.
Awesome. Okay, this question is for Sisters. Sisters is a very forward-thinking small town with very passionate community members. How do you balance the need for growth with residents' desire to maintain the small town feel?
Is that from Councilor Cobb? Yeah, therein lies the challenge, I think. Like I said, there's a lot of people that appreciate and love the small town feel of Sisters, and there's a lot of, we hear a lot in our meetings about even newcomers. It seems like the newcomers are the ones most resistant to change, because they're all coming from places that escaped what they consider to be overdeveloped places, and their fear is that it's going to happen to Sisters. So it's required a lot of education on our part to both kind of educate why increasing your housing supply can actually help with your housing affordability issue. We hear a lot about we need the need for more affordable housing, but we don't want to expand the urban growth boundary. So we're trying to let people know why that they're kind of connected issues. That in the state requires it. It's kind of an underlying premise of the state's land use system that you always have a 20-year supply of land available in your community, so that you can provide the housing and other services that you need. But I think with annexation, like these guys have mentioned, we can use that as a tool to get more affordable housing and to put affordable housing in areas where in new developments, so you don't get the resistance, and you can request a higher percentage of it in the development. So I think there's some opportunities there but we just need to respect the character too. Make sure keep Sisters.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, there are a lot. Most of the questions left over are for the city of Bend, and there's a few for the group. So just tag me in, Rachel. Okay, first one, why not an RV park in Bend?
Well, I just don't know where. It's allowable.
Yeah.
But I don't know any person who has land in Bend that's gonna build an RV park when they can make so much more money doing something else. I believe that the south of town, Larry Cline is creating an RV park, in addition to affordable housing and market rate housing. That if you, south of Murphy, that area that's totally been cleared, that's where there's gonna be lots of new housing and lots of RV spaces too.
Awesome.
But it's not affordable RV spaces. I'll clarify that.
Okay, this one isn't directed to you, Rachel, but with your homelessness experience, I'm assuming you'll respond to this one. If one assumes that there are subgroups among the houseless population, how are those groups prioritized for housing?
Well, I wouldn't say prioritize. I would say who's willing to do the work, because much like the housing continuum, the houseless population, there is a spectrum of people, some with severe needs and challenges, and it's lots of resources and people work. So you need social workers, you need healthcare providers, you need significant people to help an individual with whatever needs they have to be able to live in the society that exists at the moment. So it's really just a matter of kind of making sure that we have a spectrum of services and a spectrum of beds. And I say beds loosely. That beds could be a slot for an RV. Beds can be a safe parking location. So beds doesn't have to be necessarily a low barrier shelter. It has to be a spectrum of types of houseless services and shelters.
One thing that's really, so we have the bigger system of this continuum, but then within that, the service providers actually, with coordinated entry, they get together, and sometimes, so if one service provider has a client that's maybe coming out of the hospital and really can't go back to their living situation in a tent or something, those service providers get together and go, really kind of triage that situation. So there's these individual things too that can happen along the way within the service provider realm. And then other times maybe affordable apartments there's the housing lists and all that, but also sometimes there's opportunities that come up that aren't appropriate for each person in the houseless continuum. Maybe it's a fairly high barrier situation that's coming available. And so same thing, they kind of can triage. So there's the bigger housing system that has systems within it, but there's also some ability within the service provider community to kind of help individuals in different situations. Same thing with safe parking, right? We have, in Redmond at least, we have 7 safe parking sites. Some have more services, some have electricity and water for the RV to hook up to. Some maybe are just dry camping. And so really they have the ability to go, oh, that person has a lot of health things. Maybe they're going on cancer treatment right now. They definitely need water and electricity prioritized over the single male that's working at the gas station and doesn't have a lot of health problems. So there's the big system, and then there's also the system of our service providers able to really triage situations based on the individual needs.
Okay, one more follow-up question about the continuum. So it says the housing continuum is missing a step many communities support, managed encampments. They provide safety, water, sanitary facilities that aren't available in Juniper Ridge or China Hat. Is that being worked on?
Go ahead, start.
We are working on it. So as part of, so in Redmond right now, Redmond is very fortunate to have land that's undeveloped still. So we have Oasis Village coming in, which is the pallet house project. Just north of this is where the affordable RV park is. There is also being work on what that could look like to do a managed camp. And so Redmond has leased 12 acres from the county to do Oasis Village and the RV park model. Just north of that, the county has more land within the urban growth boundary. And so we're working on a plan, because that can be, there's a lot of tripping hazards with that managed camps to make sure you're managing it correctly. Not a ton of models to look at around of what that looks like. How do you manage them correctly? So we need to be really careful to do it right.
And I would consider that homeless in the continuum, but also managed camps require someone to do the managing, and we don't have a service provider to do that in Bend. We've had lots of people raise their hand and say we can do it, but when asked how you gonna do it, there's not a real clear answer on how that's gonna happen. So the city of Bend is ready. The city of Bend has offered surplus land to have it. I think you all might have heard that just west of or southwest of the Les Schwab, south of town, there was a piece of property. The city is leasing that from ODOT and has every intention to make that an outdoor facility. However, there's no one to manage it.
I just wanted to ask a follow-up question for everyone. Can you touch on, so it seems to me that what I'm hearing is lack of service providers really affects this. Can you talk a little bit about how the lack of affordable housing keeps those service providers from moving to this area, and then it just snowballs from there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's why the continuum is so important. And you have to address every part of the continuum to make housing work for every part of the continuum. So you can't just tackle houselessness. You can't just tackle affordable housing. You need more market rate housing so that people can move out of affordable housing into market rate housing. You need more transitional housing so that people can move out of houselessness into transitional housing and into affordable housing. You definitely need more permanent supportive housing, which is super critical, but again, that service provider is needed to provide that support.
Okay, I have two more for the group. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna kind of lighten the mood a little bit and tell you an experience I had. I said it. I didn't say I worked in Colorado, but I did work in Colorado for the city of Aspen. Talking about the continuum of housing in that community, they had to have affordable housing for doctors and lawyers.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. So after that.
Well, I just think this says it all, right? That's why I turned back to the slide. Social workers down here under the red bar. So I think that, yeah, teachers, nurses, our healthcare workers, a lot of them are very low on this. And it's not that, I mean, I think most of us would think somebody making $57,000, I mean, as a starting wage, that seems like that should get us somewhere, but it doesn't get us anywhere here as far as housing is concerned.
I'm just gonna use the word intentional. If we are not intentional, then we will not house our community. So we just have to be intentional. That means deep restrictions, really like resources. We have to pay for this to happen. So, yeah.
I have a question. In your experience, realizing this glut of service providers, in your experience or studies from other towns, how have they resolved that? Is it garnering political will from the public with public education, or how is it solved?
In areas where people can't access housing in the community, service providers can't move here, you have to train the people who live here how to do the work.
But you have to pay them enough.
You have to pay them enough. You have to have the, education facility and technical assistance to get to them to that point. I will say Shepherd's House didn't do this work. Shepherd's House didn't do low barrier shelters. Shepherd's House didn't do permanent supportive housing. They are willing to learn, to do the work, and took a lot of hand holding, and I anticipate we'll make a lot of mistakes. So there's also that too.
Okay, a little bit lighter to wrap it up. Two questions for the group. So as the Deschutes League of Women Voters begins exploring topics important to Central Oregon in these continued monthly forums, what other conversations around housing do you think the League of Women Voters should sponsor?
Have we not covered enough already? I don't know. You guys have any? I don't have any other thoughts.
Well, we talked about intention, and that's, the two things, the human capital and the resources. So anything you can do to help increase that will be to benefit the city of Bend.
I think one thing we didn't touch on, and I'm no expert in this area, but with the state, they mandated that we provide more, that we put in our code middle housing. So this idea that lots can be split into smaller things, that we can make smaller lots and do triplexes and duplexes and quadplexes. And so I think that's one thing, is that will change the look of our neighborhood, and we're all gonna have to be kind of okay with that, right? We're all gonna have to understand that density is gonna be needed to meet this need for lower priced housing. And so I think I don't know that that's necessarily for the league to take that on, but I think it's an understanding that we all need to have and get behind a bit if we're gonna solve this problem.
Awesome, thank you. And then the last question, what can League of Women Voters members and people in the room do if they want to support the development of housing in their communities? Like, how can they help you with your job?
Come to our meetings and speak in support of those measures that seek to increase the supply of housing, to change our development codes that might make it more feasible to build multifamily housing. Unfortunately, density is kind of a thing that we're gonna have to live with in the future. I think it's incumbent upon us to make it fit within our communities as much as we can, but we're kind of limited with what we can do, because every time you do that, you're increasing the cost of said housing. But I think Linda's right. It is going to be a bit of a change to people's expectations. I think the younger generation is a little more open to living in density. I find, talking with my dad, he's a big environmentalist, but he wouldn't want to live in multifamily. I think it's kind of a foreign concept to those who've kind of raised with the American dream of the single family house and the front and backyard kind of concept. But that, in reality, it's not affordable to build that anymore for our workers. So there's going to have to be some changes in the types of housing units that we see, loosening some of the requirements on ADUs. The City of Sisters also, we weren't required to implement the middle housing element that the larger cities were supposed to do, but that's something that we willingly agreed to do, to create opportunities for duplexes and triplexes within single family neighborhoods. We'll see if that works, but just political support. I think the council members need the political support to implement some of these things, because they're going to get some resistance to that, and I think they already have.
I was gonna echo the same thing, but also just provide stuff that's on City Council's radar in the next month. This week we talked about SDC exemptions and SDC methodology changes. SDCs are system development charges. That is expenses to developers and to all along the continuum to develop housing. So what does that look like? Affordable housing is exempted from SDC exemptions, but what about middle housing? What about ADUs? What about townhomes? What about cottage clusters? Those are all going to be charged SDCs, and better maybe on a what's being proposed is by a square foot, however many square feet the unit is. So if it's a smaller unit, it gets charged less. But is that the solution? Should we be charging SDCs for ADUs? Should we be charging SDCs for plexes? If that's what we're trying to incentivize, then how do we bring down those costs for developers to make those units happen? Yes.
What would higher minimum salaries and lower top salaries and practically free healthcare?
Absolutely. That's a little more difficult for the city to do. Yeah. I'm just talking about like potential city policies. Yes.
I know, because I live in Bend, that this is an issue that I worked on when it was going through city council. I don't know if your two cities have an exorbitant amount of legal and illegal short-term rentals. And I know in my neighborhood, when the short-term rental debacle started years ago, I know that there were families that were kicked out of affordable homes because the homeowner wanted to make it a short-term rental. And I know at one point the city of Bend looked at the illegals. I don't know if your cities have that, but to my way of thinking, I think short-term rentals is not the problem, but I think it is part of the problem. And I think part of the solution is to change the short-term rentals so that there isn't a plethora of short-term rentals all over the place.
That still doesn't get us the supply we need. So
well, I know that there's more than 1,000. in Bend, legal and illegal. I know that there's a lot of illegals, I know of some in my neighborhood, I'm going to be turning those in, I just learned of some more. You know, if you could take half of the 1,000, that's 500 housing units, whether it's a single family home or half of a duplex or whatever, that would make a little bit of a dent in the housing situation in any of the communities.
Yeah, it just doesn't get us what we need. Short-term rentals are controversial. There are lots of ways that you can implement policy that might say, okay, we're gonna give you these exemptions or these SDC exemptions or property tax exemptions, but you have to agree that it won't ever be a short-term rental. So there are ways to kind of make sure that anything moving forward that's implemented to reduce the costs of the development doesn't turn into a short-term rental. However, with what exists already and with what is already licensed or in the community, the only way to like change that policy is to continue to bring that up to city council, which has reviewed it in the last year as well. So I just don't think that that gets you very far with regards to, yeah. I don't think council's willing to look at it again, because they just did.
But 500 units, if you freed up 500 in the city of Bend of short-term rentals, if you could do that, that does make.
I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference,
Okay.
I'm just saying,
Hard to get there.
they've already looked at it.
Right.
We might have to look at it again in 2 years, but they're not gonna look at it again in the next year.
It's certainly an issue in Sisters as well. We do have a buffer, 250-foot buffer between short-term rentals, and it's a council goal to take a look at maybe the possibility of expanding that buffer. At the same time, I'm not totally convinced that if we just banned short-term rentals that they would automatically turn into affordable long-term rentals. I have a feeling that a lot of those buildings would just, or those homes would just remain vacant. But a portion of them could certainly turn back into long-term rentals. I just don't know if it's the panacea that everybody thinks it might be.
Not quite as big of a problem in Redmond. I think it's pretty clear we know where people that are coming to visit Central Oregon really want to stay. So it is a little bit of an issue, and I think one thing we're kind of looking at is whether with the licensing of those, if we could tack on a little bit of an extra fee that would go into a housing fund. So that is something, so we can't necessarily, I mean, people have free will to do what they want with their houses, but we can at least maybe help convert some of that energy that's in short-term rentals into maybe some housing fund or something, and we're looking at that right now in our toolkit.
Yeah, it's potentially, some communities are actually using funds from short-term rentals to help pay for affordable housing efforts in the communities.
I just want to say thank you guys, all for being here and for the work that you do every day.